You're sitting next to them, and everything seems fine on the surface. They're talking, maybe even smiling, and you're there, listening. But there's a quiet moment where your mind drifts somewhere else, and for a second, you're not really with them anymore. There's another face that appears in your thoughts, not loudly, just enough to make you pause. And you don't say anything about it. You just return to the conversation like nothing happened. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Being with someone, but not fully there. Some people have moments like this more often than they admit, moments where they compare the person in front of them to someone else. Sometimes it's an ex, sometimes it's someone they never even had, and sometimes it's just an idea of someone. From the outside, this kind of thinking is often misunderstood. It gets labeled as ungrateful, or disloyal, or emotionally distant. But people who experience it know it's not that simple, because it doesn't feel intentional. It just happens. Almost like your mind is trying to solve something you don't fully understand. And eventually, you start wondering what this says about you. Why you can't just feel fully present. Why something always feels slightly off. But people who go through this quietly know there's something deeper happening beneath the surface. This isn't just about the other person. It's about the way your mind processes connection. There's a pattern some psychologists have quietly observed for years, a tendency for the brain to create internal comparisons when emotional certainty feels unstable. Not because something is wrong with you, but because your mind is trying to define what right is supposed to feel like. And when it doesn't find a clear answer, it starts searching. Sometimes that search turns into comparison. You might notice this in small ways, like when they say something kind, and a part of you wonders how someone else would have said it. Or when you're with them, but your mind replays moments from a different connection. Not because you want to go back, but because something about it felt clearer. Some people even catch themselves imagining conversations with someone else while sitting right next to their partner. And when they realize it, there's a quiet sense of guilt, a thought that maybe they're doing something wrong. But this isn't really about wanting someone else. It's about your brain trying to resolve a feeling it doesn't fully trust yet. There's an idea in behavioral psychology, and even hinted at in work like thinking fast and slow, that the brain is constantly comparing experiences to build certainty. It doesn't just experience things, it measures them quietly, automatically, and when it comes to relationships, that measuring becomes more emotional because connection isn't something you can easily quantify. So your mind starts using reference points, past people, imagined versions, moments that felt intense or different. And without realizing it, you begin comparing. Not because your current partner is lacking, but because your brain is trying to understand what it's feeling. If you've ever noticed yourself doing this, you're definitely not alone. And if you enjoy exploring these quiet patterns of human psychology, subscribing to the channel helps more people discover these insights. For some people, this pattern is even more specific. They don't just compare randomly, they compare during moments of emotional closeness, when things start to feel real. When the connection becomes something they could actually lose, that's when the mind becomes more active, almost like it's double-checking everything. Some people notice that just as things start feeling stable, they begin thinking about someone else more, not in a strong, obvious way, just small, passing thoughts, but enough to create distance. And sometimes they pull back slightly. They become quieter, less present, not because they don't care, but because something inside them is trying to make sense of the feeling. There's also a quieter layer to this, one that doesn't get talked about much. Sometimes, the person you compare your partner to isn't even real. It's an ideal, a version of someone who would feel perfect, who would respond exactly the way you hope, who would never create doubt. And when real people don't match that internal image, something feels missing, even if everything is actually okay. This is where the mind can become a little unfair. It compares reality to imagination, and reality almost always feels slightly less intense. Not worse, just less certain. Some people even notice that no matter who they're with, this pattern follows them. Different person, same feeling. And that's usually when the question becomes unavoidable. Maybe this isn't about them at all. Maybe it's something internal, something learned. The brain is shaped by experience, especially early emotional experiences. If connection once felt inconsistent, unpredictable, or slightly out of reach, the mind learns to stay alert, to question, to analyze, not as a weakness, but as a form of protection. And over time, that protection can show up as comparison, not because you want something better, but because your mind is trying to avoid settling into something it doesn't fully trust yet. Some people even notice they feel more certain about someone when they're not around. Distance creates clarity, but closeness creates questions, and that contrast can feel confusing, almost like your emotions shift depending on how close the connection feels. There's no clear right or wrong in this. It's not better to feel this way, and it's not worse either. It's just a different way the mind organizes emotional experience. But there is a quiet trade-off hidden inside it. The ability to deeply analyze connection often comes with the difficulty of fully relaxing into it. You see more, you notice more, but you also question more. And sometimes that questioning creates distance where there doesn't need to be any. Still, there's something important underneath all of this. The fact that your mind is trying to understand connection so carefully means it values it, even if it doesn't always feel simple, even if it doesn't always feel certain. And maybe that's the part that often gets overlooked. This pattern isn't a sign that something is broken. It's a sign that your mind learned to be careful with something that matters, careful with closeness, careful with emotional certainty. And sometimes that care shows up as hesitation, as comparison, as quiet questioning, but it all comes from the same place, a desire to feel something real and to trust it when it's there. And that's not something to judge. It's something to understand, because once you begin to see it clearly, it stops feeling random. It starts to make sense. And when something makes sense, it becomes a little less heavy to carry. There are many quiet patterns like this hidden inside human behavior, and sometimes noticing them is the first step toward understanding yourself a little more honestly. If this felt familiar, there may be other parts of your inner world that are worth exploring.